Hello students, today we're going to look at section 10.4, which is more ways to solve quadratic equations, but this way we're going to use it by using square roots and making sure we understand the properties of square roots in order to solve those equations. So I have three equations written on the board and we're going to solve each one of them separately. So first of all I have 2x squared equals 8. Well, first of all I have to try to get x squared by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2, so x squared equals 4. Well, I know that x squared equals 4, but in order to find what x equals, I've got to find the square root of x squared, which means if I find the square root of the left, I have to find the square root of the right. So I'm going to do the square root of x squared equals the square root of 4. Well, I know the square root of x squared is x because x times x equals x squared. But what is the square root of 4? And you're going to think 2. Yes, but that's not the only square root of 4. Remember, square roots have two answers, the positive and the negative. Every square root has two answers, the positive and the negative, because negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, so the square root would be negative 2 and positive 2. And the way we write that is plus or minus 2. So if x equals plus or minus 2, then you can think about graphing that quadratic. Then my roots are 2 and negative 2, so my solution is there. Now you're not going to have to graph these. I'm just saying if you think about that, then x would also, 2 and negative 2 would be your roots. Let's look at the second equation. M squared minus 18 equals negative 18. So first I have to move 18 to the other side, so it becomes positive, so m squared equals 0. So if m squared equals 0, then what does m equal? 0, exactly. And we know that 0 can't be negative, so it's just 0. Let's look at the last one. B squared plus 12 equals 5. So I have to move 12 to the other side, and b squared equals negative 7. Now let's try this on a calculator. Let's take our calculator, and let's do second square root of negative 7. And that's what it looks like. And here's what happens when I push enter. It gives me a quit or an error. Why does it give me an error? Because you can't have a square root of a negative number. Negative numbers do not have square roots because there's nothing that you can multiply by itself to equal a negative, so this is no solution. So let's think for a little bit. Let's say in our situation, if I have x squared equals a positive number, I'm going to have two solutions. If x squared equals 0, then how many solutions do I have? Exactly, one solution, and it's always 0. If x squared equals a negative number, then there's no solution. That's something to help you in this process as we go along. To remember that helps you to know how many answers you're supposed to have. You're either going to get 2, 1, which is 0, or 0. Remember that. Here's the next example we're going to look at. 4z squared equals 9. Well, the first thing I have to do is divide both sides by 4. So z squared equals 9/4. You think, how do you find the square root of a fraction? You find the square root of the numerator, and you find the square root of the denominator, and you put them over each other. So, to find the square root of z squared is the square root of 9/4. So z equals plus or minus 3/2. Now you could do this on your calculator. You could do second square root, 9 divided by 4, enter, and it's going to give you 1.5. I'm going to encourage you to keep it as a fraction. Go to math 1, and it will take you to 3/2. And that's what your answer is, plus or minus 3/2. Now I'm going to tell you, the calculator is not going to give you the plus or minus part. It's going to give you the positive square root all the time. You have got to remember that you have to put the plus or minus sign. That's up to you, not the calculator. And if you don't do it, you get it wrong. I can't give the calculator a wrong answer. Take any points off on the calculator. It's all up to you. Here's our next example. This one's going to tell you that sometimes we don't get these happy integers whenever we are finding the square root. Sometimes we have to round. And in this class this year, whenever we round square roots, we're always going to round to the nearest 100th place. Okay? So let's do this one. 3x squared minus 11 equals 7. First thing I have to do is move the 11 to the other side. So 3x squared equals 18. Now I divide both sides by 3. So x squared equals 6. Well, I know that there's not a perfect square root to 6, so I'm going to plug it into the calculator. And I'm going to go second square root 6 and enter, and that's what I got. 2.4494899743. I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth, but I still have to remember the plus or minus. So the answer is going to be x equals plus or minus 2.45. Don't forget that plus or minus. That's a great way to miss the problem. And here are the final examples, and they're some of my favorite because there's a little challenge to them. So I have 6 times the quantity of x minus 4 squared equals 42. Well, I'm going to go SADMEP, so I'm first going to divide both sides by 6. When I divide by 6, that cancels out, and I'm left with x minus 4 squared equals 7. Now, you think, oh, I got to make a polynomial. No, you don't. What you need to do now is to find the square root of both sides. So the square root of x minus 4 squared equals the square root of 7. Well, the square root of x minus 4 squared is always x minus 4. And I don't need any more parentheses because I'm done with parentheses. Equals the square root of 7. And now what? I move the 4 to the other side. And you're thinking, oh, wait, Mr. Collins, I need to find the square root of 7. Actually, you don't. What you're going to do now is leave it as the square root of 7, unless the problem tells you to go on. But it's not right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the 4 to the other side, and I'm always going to put that whole number first. So my answer is going to be x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 7. Now here's where that fancy plus or minus came in. Because I'm not calculating the square root of 7, I'm not putting it in my calculator and figuring what it's close to. All I'm doing is telling myself that whatever it is, I'm going to make 4 plus that and 4 minus that in order to get my two answers. Again, for the most part, we're going to leave it like this. If it continues to ask you to do something else, then you're going to do 4 plus the square root of 7 and 4 minus the square root of 7. But for right now, we're leaving it like that. And let's look at our other example over here. I've got 1/2 times the quantity of c minus 8 squared equals 3. Now remember, when dealing fractions, I can either divide both sides by 1/2 or multiply both sides by 2. I think it's a little bit easier to multiply both sides by 2. The 2 and the 1/2 cancel out, so I'm left with c minus 8 squared equals 6, because 3 times the 2 is 6. And now I find the square root of c minus 8 squared equals the square root of 6. So c minus 8 equals the square root of 6. Now again, I take the 8 to the other side, and it goes first. So c equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 6. And again, I'm going to leave it that way unless the problem asks me to do something different. Now here's what it's going to look like if the problem asks me to do something different. I'm going to use my calculator, and I'm going to do 8 minus second square root 6. And I do enter, and that's kind of what the problem looks like. 8 minus the square root of 6, 5.55. 5.55, or 8 plus the second square root of 6, which looks just like that. Plus instead of minus. Enter. And I get 10.4494 lotta. So I'm going to just write down 10.45. So my answers would be C equals 5.55 or 10.45. Again, you don't have to do this last step unless the instructions tell you, and the instructions will be clear about that. And here are your 3 practice problems for tonight. 25k squared equals 16. I'll give you a hint. You're going to have a fraction you have to find the square root of. Number 2, 3k squared minus 1 equals 0. I'll give you another hint. You're going to have a fraction you're going to have to find the square root of. This one's not going to be so pretty, so round to the 100. Number 3, 5 times the quantity of x plus 1 squared equals 30. You don't have to go all the way like I did on the last practice problem. Just leave it at the square root. Okay, so it'll be something plus or minus the square root. Don't forget to put your plus or minuses on all your answers. If you don't, they are wrong. Please take a picture of these practice problems once you finish them and submit them through Edmodo. And I won't give that ugly smile anymore.